Good morning again, everybody. Don't worry, I don't think she has Girl Scout cookies today, so you can all stay right here. I got some at home, but not enough. It'll last me a little while. So everybody, you remember where we're at in the story of Abraham, that weird, not weird maybe, that difficult to talk about, hard to think about chapter in Genesis, chapter 19? That one place that we don't ever think is anybody's favorite, the one that we don't want to talk about too much, because it talks about a doomed city, and that's kind of what we think, right? We think Sodom and Gomorrah, right? We think they were doomed, and that's as we read in the story last week. God overthrew it, right? He destroyed it, and not just barely, but like wiped off the face of the earth, destroyed, right? It was a very immoral place, right? That's kind of what led up to that. They were so far from God and pushing God away so much and doing things so much opposite of the will of God that He destroyed them. And now, to me, it doesn't really just happen overnight, right? Where a place gets to the point where God wants to wipe it off the face of the earth, right? It just doesn't happen. I don't think they woke up one morning, had a vote, and said, how bad can we be? Let's see if God can destroy us. I don't think that's what it happened over time, right? I mean, more than likely. It happened. The morality of the place degraded over time. But it probably happened faster than you think. I mean, look at how sin kind of took over. Right? Think about it. Right? We had Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden living a perfect life. Everything was good. And then sin happened. And when that sin happened, it took over and spread so rapidly that within one generation, we already had murder. Right? We had murder and a cover-up. All that happened quickly. One generation. When sin is left unchecked, even for one generation, really bad stuff can happen. And that's kind of probably what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? Paul talks about this in Romans, and as he talks about Adam and Eve and how sin is spreading from one man to all of us. If you've got your Bibles, turn there. If not, I'm going to read it anyway. It's in Romans chapter 5. I'm going to read several verses here, and this is Romans, right? So it's kind of deep, and there's a lot of thinking that goes into this as you read it. But pay attention, because what he's saying here in Romans is that sin came from one man, but it didn't stop at one man. Because of that one man's sin, we all now we have that sin nature in us. So starting with verse 12 of Romans chapter 5. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned, according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who was the type of him who was to come. But the free gift is not like the offense. For if by one man's offense many died, much more the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abounded to many. And the gift is not like that which came through one who sinned. For the judgment which came from one offense resulted in condemnation, but the free gift which came for many offenses resulted in justification. For if by one man's offense death reigned through one, much more those who receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness will reign in life through the one, Jesus Christ. Therefore, as through one man's offense judgment came to all men, resulting in condemnation, even so one man's righteous act, the free gift, came to all men, resulting in justification for life. For as by one man's disobedience many were made sinners, so also by one man's obedience many were made righteous. Now, the point the author makes here is that sin entered from one man and spread to everyone, and righteousness came to us through Jesus Christ in one man. What I want to talk about today, though, is the sin part. And it's not a fun place to go and not a fun word to preach on or think about, but it's one that we've got to really contemplate as Christians. Because we are quick to say, look at Sodom and Gomorrah, and they are so bad and so evil. And that's true, right? It's evident, and God carried out justice on them. But The same sin nature that was in them is what is in us, because it all came from the first sin that entered into this world. So as quick as it is for us, and easy as it is for us, and maybe convenient as it is for us to point to Sodom and Gomorrah and judge and point fingers and say, look how bad they were, what we've got to do is realize that that's just as possible in the world today and maybe even with us. So the Word of God is put together with very specific purposes, and He includes this story for a reason. I think He includes it in there to remind us that you and I have got to examine ourselves and figure out how it is that we need to live. So that's kind of what I want to do today. I want us to examine ourselves. And just as it said in Romans, it may not be the same type of sin, right? It may not be that we're doing the same thing that they did in Sodom and Gomorrah, or what we're going to read about today. But the fact that sin is in our lives is something we've got to examine and figure out how we can find God in those times, and He can take that sin from us. So that's what I want to do. So if you've got your Bibles, turn to where we are here in the story of Abraham, to Genesis chapter 19. And let me give you a little recap of where we are now. If you remember, God had sent the angels to Sodom and Gomorrah to destroy the city. Right? And He went to Lot's house and spent time with Lot and rescued him from the crowd and said, you need to go, you need to run, you need to go to the mountains. Right? And we saw that Lot kind of lagged behind and took his time and didn't really go right away, didn't have that urgency, wasn't really taking God serious. And finally they had to drag him out of the city and say, you need to go. And once he got out to the edge of the city, what did he do? He said, I don't want to go to the mountains. I'm scared of the mountains. I want to go to a city. He begged to go somewhere else. He argued with these angels who were about to destroy the city on where he could go. Finally, though, he runs, he leaves, he goes, and his wife looks back against the command of the angels and turns to a pillar of salt. Remember how all that happened? Okay. So it's a pretty traumatic event, I would say, that Lot's been through, right? He's seen a lot, and he's had to probably reevaluate his life a little bit or look back at it a little bit. And we pick up here in verse number 30 of chapter 19. Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. Okay, so remember where I just said we just were? What did he want? What did Lot argue for? Well, the angel said, go live in the mountains. And Lot said, I don't want to live in the mountains. I'm scared of the mountains. I want to live in Zoar. And he moves to Zoar, and what happens in verse 30? He's scared of Zoar, and then he moves to the mountains. It's a little bit ironic, isn't it? Or comical, or one of those times where we've all been. Imagine that, right? God was right the first time. Right? God said, go to the mountains. He said, I don't want to. Where did he end up? The mountains. You ever been there? God says, go do this. You say no, and you end up there anyway? Yeah? It happens, right? God is right. We've got to trust Him. Lot didn't. Lot didn't take God seriously. And, he ended up being afraid there in Zoar, and then him and his daughters ran off here and lived in a cave in the mountains. Now, I've got to wonder here. Okay, he's scared in Zoar. We get that. Why not run to Abraham, his uncle? His uncle's wealthy, powerful, respected, safe. Right? Lot's just lost his wife, a lot of friends, future son-in-laws, all of his possessions. Why not go to the place where your uncle is, who could help to take care of it? And it's not mentioned here. He doesn't think about that. He goes from a city he begged to be in to a cave. So why didn't he go? Well, here's what I think. I think we saw it a little bit last week, didn't we? That Lot's mindset wasn't really right. And really the week before too, right? What did he do as the strangers knocked on his door? He offered up his daughters, right? He wasn't really thinking straight. Living in this corruption, in this immoral place, had altered Lot's ability to reason. He wasn't really thinking, right? And why else would you argue with angels about where to go when they tell you to run? Why else would you lay back for a while and take your time in getting out of a city that the angels say they're about to destroy? His mind just wasn't quite working the right way. And unfortunately, that mindset, that attitude, that corruption has passed on from him to his family, to his whole household. And this is where it becomes dangerous. So what I want us to do here now is look at these next few verses. And as we read them, again, it's not the specific sin that I'm worried about happening in our houses, but the characteristics that take place, the traits that we see from this family, this household that's been corrupted by the immorality that they had lived in for that time. And what I want us to do is be really serious and take some time to look at these traits and say, is our household, is our family, do they follow these things? Because if they do, we've got some serious work to do. I know for most of you, your kids are grown up, but you've got grandkids, right? Great-grandkids. You've got nieces and nephews. You've got neighbor kids, right? You've got the kids that run up and down the aisles of church here every Sunday, right? That's all part of the realm of influence that all of you have. And if you don't think that you make a difference in the lives of the kids, I can tell you for a fact that you make a difference in Jonah and Adam's life. They're watching you, okay? They're paying attention. They notice these things. So it's a pretty serious reflection we've got to do on our own lives and on how we live and what our attitude is. And if we see these kind of things popping up in our lives or in the lives of the ones that we love, we've got to do something, take some action to correct this course, because the generations below us, they need some guidance, right? And that comes from all of you out there. So there's a few traits that I want to look at that we see at play here in the next couple verses, not necessarily by Lot, but by Lot's family. Remember, Lot was corrupted. Lot made the decision to live in Sodom, and his decisions now are reflected in how his daughters make choices. So let's look at the next verse. Look at verse 31. Now the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come to us, as is the custom of all the earth." So I don't know how long they were in this cave. It doesn't really say. But I think we can kind of pick up here that it was long enough for them to think that the whole world was destroyed. They either thought that what happened in Sodom happened everywhere except for these little select pockets of people that might have survived. They either thought that, which is maybe what they thought, or they thought, we've lost everything, so how can my father arrange a marriage for me if we don't have any? Nobody's going to want to marry a broke person, right? One of those things is going through their minds. Either way, it doesn't really matter, because what we don't see in their thinking is God. I don't care how long the time has been. It could have been days, weeks, months, or years. Remember what God had just done. He had saved them. Right? He had said, you, Lot, and your family can escape. You can run. I'm going to destroy this city, but you can run and be safe. And I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to save you. And after that, then their minds turn to, well, now what? Now we've got to figure out a way to continue our heritage, our lineage. There's no God involved. So they come up with their own plans. And there's where we start to see the degradation and where we start to see a problem in households around the country today. There's no godly perspective. We're not looking for a God answer. We're not looking for godly guidance. And even right after God does something big in our lives, we don't take the time to say, okay, God, now what? We shrug it off, say we expected it, and move on to the next thing. Probably complaining about the next problem or trying to solve the next situation with our own thoughts and schemes. That's what Lot's daughters were doing. They just experienced a miracle. They were just real life witnesses of a miracle. And instead of seeking God for what the next step would be, right, they decided to come up with their own idea. Right, and their own idea isn't really the best one, right? So look at the next verse, 32. So this is the daughters having a discussion. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father. What's weird about this is there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of debate. Right? It just seems like it's nonchalant. Right? Like it's normal. Like this is something that they didn't really have to think too hard about. This was just what they thought would be the next right step. So you've got to wonder, had they seen something like this? Had they seen this act before? Had they had friends back in Sodom who lived in households with these incest type of relationships? I think it's possible, right? We had a very immoral city, a very distracted city, a city very far away from the will of God, and now we've got products of that city acting like it's no big deal to be impregnated by their own father. It just seems to them as, well, this is just a normal course of action. This is just something that we do. And above that, right, it's they're not concerned with their father, they're more concerned with what they want. And what's their plan? Alcohol and seduction to get what they want from a man. Had they seen that at play in Sodom? I'm going to say probably so. They had strayed so far from what was morally acceptable that this just now seemed right. This just seemed regular. It just seemed okay. This just seemed what it was to do. We don't see an internal struggle, right? We don't see that internal dialogue of these ladies struggling and figuring it out and praying to God. We don't see that. We just see them saying, well, here's what we have to do. This is the next logical step. And that's what starts to happen whenever we start to lose track of God in our lives. Our idea of what is moral gets distorted. And it gets twisted. We start to think that things that God says are not okay are okay because of the situation we live in or because we've seen it enough. And once that happens in our household, it spreads like wildfire. It goes. Once we let the immoral kind of get into our lives and our heads, it starts to twist our whole way that we look at the world. And I think that's what happened here in Lot's household. They had no morality in the house, and Lot had done so much to fit in Sodom that they kind of set God aside for a while, and in doing so, what happened is their idea of what was right and wrong, good and bad, got shifted. It got shifted. So I don't think these daughters thought they were doing anything wrong. I think they approached this thinking it was the right solution. Their morality was twisted. Now, because of that, or in light of that, we see what happens here with Lot. So in a household that has this moral compass that's twisted, that doesn't have this perspective on God, it starts with the parents. It starts with the leaders in the house, right? So what we see here with Lot is the daughters could not have possibly looked at Lot, at this point in time anyway, as a man who needed to be respected or honored or feared or listened to. Right? They didn't see him as a righteous man or a man of God, a man that deserved to have that respect. What they saw was a man who was a means to an end. Right? They wanted babies, and Lot was there. He was convenient. They didn't see him as that authority figure. When our morality gets twisted, when God gets out of it, and when the parents don't have that righteous living attitude and guidance, it messes with the whole way that God intended a family to work. And the only way, I think, that we can get to this point where the daughters are thinking this way of Lot, where the daughters are thinking that this is the next thing that's okay, where their morality is in that is that shifted, is that Lot isn't a spiritual leader in the home. So we know that Lot worked hard to be accepted by Sodom, right? He tried to be accepted. We don't have any reason to think he really complied with or participated in a lot of the sins that Sodom did, but we do know he was a businessman there. He was a leader in the town. He wanted to fit in, right? He wanted to be a part of the leadership and the guidance of the city. So he probably overlooked a lot of the sins. He forgot about a lot of the sins. He stepped over a lot of the sins. And he wasn't that leader in the house. So what do the daughters see him as? Just another guy from Sodom. And they'd seen those guys before. They went to school with those guys, right? They They saw those guys out and about at the store. They know what their attitudes are and how they act and how they behave, and their dad is just like that. If we want to make a difference in the lives of the ones that are the generations below us, we've got to be different than the world. We've got to stand out. We've got to make an impact. We've got to have that authority so that they see that we're different and they respect us for that. What's, I guess, sad is the word, is from now on, Lot really isn't even an active part of the story. Up until this point, Lot's kind of been the main part of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. But now he's not an active role. He's more like an object, more like a bump on a log. He's just there. He's just there. He's just Lot. Look at verse 33. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. That's as in-depth as we get from Lot from now on. He's just kind of there. Just kind of there. Now, what happens here in the household? If the father is not the spiritual leader, right? There's no parental authority here. There's no guidance in this house. The morality of the household has been twisted. God has been set aside, right? They're not looking at things in God's eyes, and they've lived in the sin and the cesspool for year after year after year. What happens is they become insensitive. So we've talked about this, right? The more you get exposed to something, you start to lose your sensitivity to it. Right? The world has done that to all of us, I would say. Right? The things that 5 years ago wouldn't be allowed on TV, now we don't even really pay attention to. Right? Music and ads and TV and magazines have all gone so far from what would have been socially and morally acceptable even just a few years ago. But we don't even notice. And this is really important with children, especially as they start to grow up. If they're exposed to immorality and depravity and sinful lifestyles day after day after day, they become numb to it. And as they grow and they start to develop their ethics or their moral compass, it's already off. Right? And if they get that basis for what they really believe in, it's in the wrong place. That's what happened with Lot and his daughters. They lived in this mess of a city, in this really bad place, and Lot was tolerant of it, maybe not participated in it, but tolerant of it to the point where they were just all kind of nonchalant. They didn't care, right? Didn't matter. They were indifferent. Sin is happening. This place is a mess, but well, that's just what it is, right? Oh, that's Sodom. Oh, I was a teenager once too. It's that kind of attitude that led to what happens here. And look at verse 34 and 35. It happened on the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, "Indeed, I lie with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve the lineage of our father." Then they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It's just like it's just casual, normal business, right? The older sister comes and says, "Well, you know what I did. You got to go do it too." And she says, "Okay." Right? There's no remorse. There's no discussion. There's no pointing out that that's not right. It's just that it's just normal. Have you ever known someone who's had a house burn? You ever know somebody's lost their house to a fire? You ever talk to them and you hear this response a lot with people that lose everything, a fire or a flood or a robbery or whatever it might be, where they get out safe, right? They always say, I didn't lose anything that I can't replace. My family's safe, we're alive. That's all I want. Right? We hear that all the time, and that's very true. But it wasn't true in Lot's case. At least I don't think. See, it seems like when Lot lost all his stuff, he lost who he was. It's gone. He fell apart. His family fell apart. And I think that's why his wife looked back. They had put so much stock into gathering stuff and importance in a city that when they left it all behind, she couldn't help but look back. That's what was important to her. Not what was her family in front of her. That wasn't as important as what she had left behind. And everything just deteriorated and it fell apart. See, Lot had it all wrong. It's not about gathering possessions and importance and status. But he missed that. He missed that. So they could say Lot had it all in Sodom, but by this time, and we don't know how long this is later, he doesn't really have anything. So look at verse 36. Thus both daughters of Lot were with child by their father. Now I don't know how long it takes. Well, it's 9 months, right? Between 36 and 37. But I don't know what the conversations were. I don't know really where they went. I don't know if they lived still in that cave, if they went back to the city. Don't really know a lot of what happens here, and I think that maybe is worse than knowing. So between 36 and 37, a child is born, right? That's 9 whole months. We don't see Lot repenting. We don't see the daughters crying out to God. We see nothing. We don't see Lot teaching his children. We don't see outrage from Lot. We don't see anything different. It's just, well, here goes. It's like a normal birth. As if to put an exclamation point on how twisted their idea of what was right and wrong is. There's nothing in between it. And then the names. The names. It's like a slap in the face to God. This is what it says in verse 37 and 8. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger, she also bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. Moab means from my father, and Ben-Ami means from my kinsman. Do you remember how important names were? We talked about this when Abram talked with God, and God said, your name's now going to be Abraham. We spoke of that. We've talked about names before. Names are important. They're conversation pieces, right? They are times when somebody at the dinner table, everybody's around, they can say, why in the world is your name Isaac? Right. And Isaac will say what? Because here's the story of how my father and my mother laughed whenever God said I would be there. Right? Can you imagine this conversation? Well, how did you get the name Moab? Oh, well, I'm the son of my aunt and my grandpa. I don't know exactly how that works. Right? It would be an interesting conversation, right? It's almost like they didn't even try to hide their sin. So it's right out there in the open, right out there for everybody to see. It's not really a good thing for a family that God went out on a limb, went the extra mile, and saved. But you know what? It actually gets a little bit worse. If you're familiar with the Old Testament and the struggle of Israel and the time they're in the wilderness and the time they're going into the Promised Land and into Canaan, you recognize the names of the people, the Moabites and the Ammonites. They were enemies, fierce enemies, really, of Israel for generations. So as little as we hear from Lot, really nothing. Right? Lot is not even mentioned from now on. We don't know if he ever connected again with Abraham. We don't know how long he lived. We don't know where or when he died. He's pretty much just disappeared here. And he would be irrelevant if it wasn't for his offspring being direct enemies of the offspring of his uncle. So there is fallout. There's fallout for sin. There is fallout when a household strays from the plan that God has for them. And you may not see it. You may not experience it. You may not feel it. You may be able to shrug it off or ignore it or justify it. But the long-term reaching impacts, we may never know. And I think that's what we as a Christian community and we as a country have to figure out. Because if that immorality starts in the home and we get this twisted idea of what's right and wrong in our households and we start to overlook it and not think about it, then it's going to affect not only our house but our community, and it's going to continue to expand. I'm not a big fan of swimming. I don't really like water. I'm a little bit scared of water. I'm not really scared of water. I'm scared of drowning. Right? Water I appreciate. Drowning freaks me out. Right? So I like the ocean. Anybody like the ocean? It's fun to look at. My favorite part of the ocean is a lawn chair, beach chair on the beach with a book and listen to the ocean while I take a nap. That's my favorite part. But I do like to wander out into it once in a while. Have you ever been there and felt what they call the undertow? Right? It's like a current that you can't really see. Right? You can see the waves coming in and out. You know that's there. But sometimes you'll get into a place where there's this water that's flowing that you can't tell from the surface. Everything looks okay on top, but underneath there's this undertow. That's kind of what I think this moral breakdown is in the world. It's like that dangerous thing that's underneath that can suck you out before you know it. Everything on top may look just fine. But down deep underneath the surface is something that can grab you and move you and really destroy you if you're not careful. So what we've got to do as Christians, as family leaders, as people that the generation and the generation after that looks up to and respects, what we've got to do is be that moral authority. Right? We've got to know what it is that we stand for and stand for it. Right? And that means to not be passive, to not let it go. That means to pay attention to the ones around us and see what their lives are like and what it is that they need and where the direction they need. What that means is to realize that none of us are immune to sin. None of us are immune to what got to Sodom and Gomorrah or to Lot's family. It can happen gradually over time. If we're passive or if we ignore or if we tolerate, before long, we're going to be right there where Lot was. So as leaders, what we've got to realize is sure, this culture around us is not the greatest, right? It's sinful and there's bad stuff that happens and that is what it is, but we don't have to participate. And more importantly, the generation after us needs us. The generations need you. Your kids, your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, the people here at church, they need you. And it's okay to stand up for what it is that you know to be right, because we don't want a bunch of Lots or Sodoms. We don't need that. What we need is a bunch of Christians who are willing to step in and say, this is what God wants in your life, and this is where He wants you to stay away from. Because you've been there, right? Now, I'm going to tell you from experience, as a not too far removed young person, we ain't always going to listen to you, okay? And I can say it's probably going to get discouraging. But God calls you to be there for a reason. God's put you there, and God wants you to be that example. So we want to get the morality back on track. It starts with you and with the ones that you're around, because God has put them in your life for that purpose. We can do it. We can avoid this Lot household. We can avoid Sodoms. But it's got to be our mission. It's got to be our purpose. Right? We can make the world a better place. One relationship, one influence at a time. Anybody have anything this morning? All right. Let's sing one more hymn.